Hello, I'm Nicholas Walls, and this is History in 5. And today we'll be discussing nationalism and how it both fueled and undermined the great powers of the First World War. Nationalism is a shared association based on common cultural traits. There's no one definition for it. It's fairly broad, being an ism, a lot of variations there. But most nations share a common language, a flag, and usually a judicial code. The nationalism that dominated the 19th and 20th centuries, that gave rise to the great powers, was a particularly virulent and violent breed of nationalism that spawned waves of violent competitions, i.e. wars, and waves of conquest, i.e. wars against other people. Now, humans have always been social animals. What makes us unique from, say, bees, swans, or packs of dogs is that we are able to conceptualize of the polis, of the state, of an abstract sense of belonging. Regrettably, this can also lead to us versus them tribal conflict, but package deal it seems. Prior to the industrial era, and prior to this new breed of nationalism emerging, most identities were based upon immediate family association, allegiance to crown in many cases for the older powers, and some of that lingered on. Thank you, Britain. Nationalism expanded the borders and boundaries of this concept of identity, often to include multiple tribes under one. Nationalism added another layer of identity, allowing people to be both, say, British, as well as, say, Indian, or for older times, Roman, as well as Egyptian. A statewide example would be, you are both a Texan as well as an American, Californian as well as an American. My ears. One of the best examples of nationalism's terrifying mobilizing capabilities, again in the 1800s, was the German Empire. This big old lump in the middle of Europe. Prior to the German Empire, there was the Holy Roman Empire. Not Holy Roman nor an empire. It was in fact the medieval German successors to the legacy of Rome, the tribes that had moved in and taken over. 300 separate states, a confederacy of competing princes with different dialects, religions, and coinage in many cases. This was swept away by Napoleon. Napoleon had come in and kicked that all down, and that's kind of a good thing, minus all the bloodshed. Prussia, a northern Germanic state, rolled up and said, "New plan, guys, we're getting unified." The German Empire, last to unify and industrialize the great powers, not counting poor little Bulgaria down here, because, sorry, Bulgaria. Last to unify and industrialize, they quickly marched into the forefront of the world stage, overtaking many of the older powers, such as Britain, in its industrial capacity. Germany is a prime example of the power of nationalism, the ability to get many people rallied to one cause and in one direction. Many hands make easy work. Many, many hands forge an empire. However, nationalism does have its darker side. One of the key elements of nationalism is pride. This national pride fueled conquest and competition amongst nations, each one striving to be the best. Now, best is an inaccurate term, rather nebulous of what that means, but during this heyday, this wave of new imperialism in the 1800s, it meant colonies. Colonies were a tally mark, a way of measuring amongst the great powers of whose flag was the biggest at that time. It enabled them to look at a map and go, "Ah, how splendid! All this? Dibs." Never mind the cost of lives or the destruction to the native people. And never mind that to the average citizen who didn't even own a patch of dirt at home in their homeland, why should they care about something way over there with people they've never met? That is the power of nationalism. It is not rational. National sentiment carried on, defiant in such a paltry thing as logic. With national identity came a sense of proprietary ownership, a sense of pride and identity associated with abstract concepts. If Lady Britannia's honor is besmirched, you are far more likely to go out and fight and die than we fought a war against people far, far away for land that you'll never see. The idea that you, the citizen, are injured when the country or the flag is injured. That is the power of nationalism. That is the exact pride that would lead nations down the goose-step, lockstep march to destruction in the First World War. Again, it is not logic, but pride at the core of this ideal. And this emotional appeal worked brilliantly for those who had nothing. Because even if you didn't own that patch of dirt in your homeland, even if you had nothing to gain directly from wars against other people far, far away, you could at least claim to be part of something greater, bigger, and better. Now, the divisive factor of nationalism for these great powers comes when it pushes from below. Remember all those colonized peoples? Well, nothing breeds imitation like success. And so these myriad oppressed peoples saw this and thought, hey, maybe we should get a flag of our own. Many of the great powers were multi-ethnic and held diverse populations in their borders. Two of the great powers, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, would see much struggle and strife emerging within their borders just prior to the Great War. Now, the Austro-Hungarians and the Ottomans shared a problem with the Balkans and particularly with Serbia. A sense of Slavic unity, a calling for pan-Slavic national pride emerged. The issue becoming, it did not matter where those Slavs lived or amongst whom else they lived. And this is where nationalism, even from below, gets complicated. Ethnic nationalism can become very, very complicated, especially when an empire is multi-ethnic. If indeed, say, Slavs live in Macedonia, well, then they call for Slavic national unity. But what happens when the neighbor is Greek? Or considers themselves Macedonian and separate from Greeks and Slavs? This creates tensions. This creates problems. And this creates a setting for a world war and a legacy of ethnic bloodshed, ethnic cleansing, more of the same, and lots of arguments. Lots of arguments. While the Slavic situation is a good example of these ethnic tensions, we can also point to India and its drive for self-realization. While a large ethnic community was Hindu, they had an equally large Muslim population. And so, for the push for a Hindu national identity did not appeal to a large portion of the populace, and it was very difficult to reconcile the two. It was hard to engender responsibility and a drive to join in for something that would not support them, and looked an awful lot like the colonization of their prior masters. So it is that nationalism was both the force for unity and a force for division amongst the great powers. I'm Nicholas Walls. This has been History in 5. Have a great one.